Okay, so I guess let's talk about using the shoe dye on boots and shoes. Tip number one is, of course, be sure your shoe is completely cleaned of its original finish, shoe polish, wax, whatever. Number two, if you feel uncertain as to whether or not you're going to be able to be successful with this, then use your least favorite shoe and or a thrift shoe that you don't care about. But honestly, I've never totally messed one up. You can always paint over things. You can always use the acetone to take stuff off. So it really is worth doing and trying if you want your shoes to be a specific color. So most of my things are a combination of paint and dye. So in these two cases, the blue is the Air Force blue, and then the purple one is eggplant or whatever it is. And I use the little sponge like I talked about earlier to apply. Each of these I think have 3 coats. And I use the spray waterproofer as the finish. And I like the dull natural shine that provides. Both of these I did paint the heels because they were black. And so I used that dark brown. Ideally, it looks a little better when you don't paint the cap. There's something that's more authentic looking about it when the cap actually looks separate. So that's something to keep in mind. I try not to get too much stuff on the bottom of the shoe. Obviously, sometimes I'm more successful than others. On this shoe, it did have black along here. And so I used that little brush and just painted it. And so I didn't find it particularly difficult. I used the dark brown paint also on this strap, and I used nail polish on the buckle. All of those have held up extremely well. The middle of here is elastic, and it used to be black. And I used when I was doing the circular motions with the little sponge over it, I just did the little sponge thing over this too. And it has created kind of it is still dark, it is still obviously formerly black, but it does blend a lot better and isn't a black stripe down the center. So, and the elastic hasn't changed its elasticity because of the paint. So, I thought that was pretty darn successful. The, whatchamacallit here, this up here is because I dropped the brush, a different brush on it. So, that's a mistake, not a wear issue. I painted the zipper gold, and that one is done. You know, kind of an introvert, and I don't talk this much ever. I swear, I think I'm losing my voice. So, it's getting all scratchy. Okay, so anyway, on this one, I also used that brown, dark brown Angelus paint. I painted the strap as well as the heel. You can kind of see, here we go, this is better, where it got scuffed, scraped, scratched by something. Now, I could easily, you know, touch that up with a little bit of paint and it's no big deal. This here is from the other one of these rubbing up against that. So, you know, that's kind of how that one went. Pretty smooth, not a lot of issues. I didn't want to do too many different colors. I just kind of went with that because of the strap, the dust on it. That zipper, I used a tiny bit of nail polish. It doesn't take much, and it really does. You just get it to where it's kind of laying on top. It's not soaking into the actual zipped area, so your zipper still works. So that's pretty awesome. So that's a real leather boot, and using both the paint and the dye. This shoe was just black, thrift store. I love this shoe. I love how it has the point and the squared off top. I love the height. It's comfortable. I love how I can slip it in. I don't have to buckle. So I was like, I've got to find a way to paint these. So I used the dye on these, and I'm very happy with it. But it was before I started leaving this bottom part black. So eventually that may come off and I'll leave it off. Now on the bottom, this is how I use that Lumiere metallic paint, because you know, I think it just looks really cool when you're walking and then you end up with this like, woo, woo, little peekaboo shiny thing. And so I've done that on a couple of pair of shoes, and I like the effect. Of course, it has to be at least this tall, which is not that tall, in order to be able to see it when you walk. But it's pretty cool, and these have held up very, very well. And you can see underneath here, you know, I got some paint on the bottom, but it wasn't any big deal. And I went ahead, instead of painting that tiny part of the sole brown or copper or anything, I just went ahead and did the purple, and it doesn't stand out in any way, so I was perfectly happy with that. This shoe, another good slip-on. I'm kind of a fan of mules. Super comfy. This was one of those shoes where when I looked at it, it wasn't like I was all excited about the shoe exactly, but I thought it was really cool how they had the elastic in between these leather pieces, and I thought that was just kind of a cool design. So I bought it just so I could paint it, and I used the dye, obviously green on one side and blue on the other, and then I used paint in this middle part because it was real scuffed and yuck looking. This one has kind of a plasticky sole, and it wasn't too black, so I left it, and the heel kind of the same, so I left it. So anything you can leave, it always ends up being more durable. Like even if this inside were white, I wouldn't have painted the inside, because once my foot's in there, no one sees it. So those are some things perhaps to keep in mind. Okay, moving on. These two are some vintage boots that I found at a thrift store. I love boots, and sadly this year I only got to wear boots twice. I mean, literally 2 times. I live in central South Texas, and it really was not even cold. So that was kind of a bummer, because I painted these so I could wear them this year, and that was that, but whatever. Both of these had really scuffed up heels, and so I went ahead and did the brown paint on them. I tried to follow some of the lines that were natural on the shoe and use 2 different colors. My original plan was to try to do oxblood. That didn't work out, but I'm happy with the color they are, and that worked. This one, pretty much solid green. I did a little bit of detail in the back, and on the toe, it was my experiment to use my little brush and to use a brush to paint on the dye. And it has held up well. It stays. It was easy to control. It wasn't too runny. This particular design is nothing to write home about. I think I might mess with that, but it was just an experiment in seeing how that worked. So that is that. Now, this was a brown boot, and I found myself not wearing it because I have another pair of brown boots I always would wear. So I left the back part brown, and I used the dye, And as you can see, it's the scrunchy kind of boot, and it still has held up really well because it's real leather, and I didn't put too much product. So, and what I did is I just kind of pulled this stuff apart as I was doing it, and then the second coat I kind of pulled it a little bit different way so that I could get in all those creases. But I'm much happier with this boot now that it's painted, so that was a good save. And on this one, it was already a brown boot, so the zipper was already a really dark brown, and the pull was already a brown. Now, lastly, is this boot. Now, I just thought this was the coolest looking boot because of all the different parts and patches, and I just thought, oh, something really cool could be done with that boot. Well, unfortunately, it's not real leather, and so you notice it kind of has more of a plasticky sheen. This is using the same dye that the other boots did, but because it's faux leather, it doesn't react the same with the dye. So it ends up a little glossy, a little plasticky, so that's not exactly my preference. Now, this is a good example of how you can use the dye, and you can apply it in different areas. And on this one, I did use a brush because obviously I'm not going to be able to control a sponge on all those edges. So that was successful, and it has held up well as far as the surface itself on the parts that are very stiff. So this is the key with any kind of painting or dyeing of your boots or shoes. The more flexible your fabric, the less perfect it's going to be, and the less amount of time it's going to stay looking really good. So if you have, cowboy boots, really stiff, really sturdy, not a lot of flex, you paint something on that even detailed and it's not going to move, and it's going to be awesome. You have something like this normal boots that I just showed you, those do real well. I know lots of people have had a lot of success with that. With these faux leather products, it's really just kind of a fabric, really, in a lot of ways. And so this is what happens. So you paint and everything looks awesome. And then you start to notice these things that look like cracks. And actually, it's not a crack. It's where the fabric is pulling, like when I walk or when I move, it pulls, and it just, the fabric has so much give that it just separates, and then the black shows through, which I think looks kind of crappy. So I'm not very fond of that, and so I'm on the lookout for something that has similar lines that won't look like that on the heel or in the front. But it worked. It also was a little bit harder because of the texture to get good coverage. So faux leather can be cheaper, can be whatever, but my advice is, if you're not opposed to having real leather products and you're wanting to color your shoes, you need to do real leather. So let's see. I guess that's it for that.